Hey guys, it's Jason here, and thank you for tuning in to part 2 of how to build your first PC. Right now I'm just going to go over the parts that are going to be in the build, and then later I'll actually show the construction and the process of the correct process of building the computer. So I'm just going to go in order from left to right. Here is the graphics card that we'll be using today. This is the Radeon R7 As I mentioned in part 1, this card is not the card that is in the build that was in part 1 because of they don't carry this product anymore. It's not manufactured, it's not produced, and also if you wanted to buy this exact card, you'd be paying 3 or 4 times the price that I paid for it when I bought it new, and it's not worth that price now. But the 1050 Ti that is in the build will have an additional 2 gigs of RAM, and it will also be very much faster than this card here. But this will be the card that's in the computer that we're going to be building today. This is the power supply we'll be using. It's the Thermaltake Smart 650 watt. It's not modular like the power supply that's going to be in your build, and it's also 100 watts. Has a 100 more watts. The power supply, when it comes down to it, really isn't going to affect the build as much. The parts in part 1 wouldn't need 650 watts. The 550 watts is going to be enough for that build. So yeah, that's the power supply. The processor. This is the AMD X4 880K. It's AMD's last main flagship processor for their FM2 lineup before Ryzen came out. It's a quad core, 4 gigahertz, boosted 4.2. It's a pretty good processor. This will be the cooler that comes with your processor. It's going to be a little different than this because this is a Wraith cooler, but your cooler will be the exact same. It just won't have this plastic shroud, and I don't think it'll be as wide. But yeah, it's pretty much the same cooler that you guys will have. This is the motherboard that'll be in the build. It's the F2A88XM from Gigabyte. Pretty good motherboard. That's the main bits of the parts. The only parts that I'm not showing right now is going to be the case, the RAM, the hard drive, and I believe that's it. So that's all the parts. I'm going to move on to show you the proper way to construct it. Okay guys, what I've done since then is I've gotten the motherboard out of its box, and the motherboard box is a perfect place to do all your initial construction, putting your CPU in, your RAM in, CPU cooler on, all that stuff. You can do that while the motherboard is out of the case. It's perfectly fine. I've already put the CPU into its socket. The reason why I did that is this build was already built before this video, and the paste, I couldn't get all the CPU paste off of the CPU, and I was afraid that it was going to get into the motherboard, so I just left it in. But the way that you know, first off, when you're dealing with AMD products, your CPU is going to have pins that are going to insert into the motherboard to allow it to connect. When you open your CPU out of the box, make sure that none of the pins are bent. If you have to get a magnifying glass or whatever you have to do, just make sure none of the pins are bent. If they are bent, you can take tweezers and gently move them to make them straight and lined, or if you're not comfortable with doing it, you can always send it in for an RMA. Once all the pins are aligned, you're going to this silver latch at the bottom of the board, the CPU socket. You're going to lift it up to make it straight, and then you're going to place your CPU in. And if you can tell, this top left corner, there's an arrow, a golden arrow, and on the motherboard there's an arrow as well, and that just tells you this arrow goes with that arrow, so this is the way the CPU goes in. And then once that goes in, it's flat, can't be moved. You pull down your lever, gently and snap it into place, and then your CPU is in place. After that, you'll put your CPU cooler on. When you get it out of your box, the CPU will already have CPU paste on it, thermal paste on it, so you can just place it on and snap it. But since this build, like I said, was already built, I had to remove the paste. So I'm going to apply the CP15 from CryoRig to it. You won't have to do this step, but I will have. Sorry guys, turned out my CryoRig paste was empty, so I'm going to have to use this Insignia. It's not the best, but it'll do the job. So if you have to do this in the future, if you get another motherboard and the CPU you buy doesn't come with a CPU cooler with pre-applied thermal paste, you're just going to want to put a dot, like the size of like a pea, in the very center of the CPU. And that's all you need. I've applied the paste. You can then attach your CPU cooler. Your CPU fan header is the fan header that this plug-in will go into. So you want to make sure that whichever way you orient it, your cable can reach. I feel like this way is going to be the best way because it's right over the header. So what you'll do, it has this latching mechanism. You're going to place the CPU cooler directly above the CPU. Then you're going to make sure that both latches are over the hooks on each side of the CPU. This is the most tedious part of adding the cooler. I recommend doing the side that doesn't have the lever first, and then you're just going to pull down until you hear that snap. Your CPU cooler is now in place, and you can attach your CPU fan header. Your CPU fan has been attached. Next, we will do the RAM. Again, the RAM in your build will be different than this, but all RAM can be inserted the same. As long as it's DDR3 can be inserted the same as DDR3, and DDR4 is different because if you can see, there's this little notch. You'll find a notch on your motherboard, and you're going to place your 2 DIMM slots in 1 and 2. It's labeled on your motherboard. Just like that. Make sure the notch lines up with the notch on the board. Gently insert it and push down until you hear that click. You do the same with the other stick. Line it up with the tooth. Make sure it's inserted properly. Push down until you hear the click. Your RAM is now installed. That is all we can do without the computer being in the case, so we'll move on to the case. Next, what you'll want to do is you'll want to grab your motherboard I/O shield. It's going to be in your box. It's going to be wrapped in a plastic. What you'll do is you'll take it out and you'll cross-reference the I/O on your motherboard and figure out which way the motherboard's going to be facing. And in this case, the motherboard will be like that. So you push this up to the motherboard. It doesn't fit that way. Put it like that, and things start to align. So it's going to go in the case like that. So what you'll do is you'll go around, and there's a socket hole right here, and you're just going to firmly press in until you hear it pop. Once all 4 corners have been clicked in, you're good to go to add the motherboard. We'll do this by placing the motherboard here. These brass standoffs, in most cases, are pre-applied. Since this is a motherboard, micro ATX motherboard case, the standoffs will be in the micro ATX form factor, and that's where these holes, that's where they're placed. If this was a mini ITX or a full ATX tower, the standoffs would be in those positions. But the case that we picked for the Part 1 build was a micro ATX case, so more than likely it will have pre-applied standoffs. If not, they will come in a plastic baggie inside of the case. You just open it up, take a screwdriver, and they'll come with a Phillips head attachment that will allow you to turn them and twist them and put them into place. The motherboard will be marked micro ATX. You'll just put the standoffs in each one of those holes, and then your motherboard will fit right on. So what we'll do now is we'll take the motherboard. You can hold it by the CPU cooler now because it is attached, and we're going to place it inside the case. Then, once the motherboard is placed, you'll see that the motherboard has alignment screw holes. Your case will come with pre-packaged, probably the same bag that the standoffs are in, with screws. There is a certain type of screw inside the bag that will fit these standoffs, but it's flat and has a Phillips head, and it will fit right into the standoffs. So I'm going to put all the screws. Once all the screws are in place, the motherboard is now stationary and will remain in the case. You see that all cases will have this same exact layout. It may not be the same interface, as in they may have, instead of a USB 3.0 header, it might be only USB 2.0. It won't probably have a fan control speed module, but things that it will have an HD audio, and it will have all of these little strings of wires. Well, this is a USB 2.0 header. You may or may not have that, but you will most definitely have these. This is the cables that allow you to turn the case on, the power the computer, and it tells you hard drive activity, things like that. These will all come with every case, and the layout of them is marked on the motherboard, so we'll get to that soon. Like I said, this is a USB 3.0 header. This is your USB 2.0, your HD audio, and here's a USB card reader. And that is it. This case also has this, which powers the fan controller, and these are all just the fan cables. We won't worry about those at this moment, because these are the only cables that will go connecting to the motherboard. First things first is you want to separate all your cables. You don't want them to be jumbled up. Then once you separate them, you'll look at them and decide the best way to get them to your motherboard without causing too much clutter. These cables here will always be at the bottom of your motherboard, so if your motherboard has grommeted holes or just holes like these at the base, you always use those. Same for your HD audio and your USB 2.0. Same thing. If your case has holes next to the bottom of your motherboard, you want to use those. If not, you'll use the bottom left holes, because you want the shortest path. Same thing for this. Is USB 2.0. Your USB 3.0 in this case, this motherboard particularly, is going to be located in this area, so you'll probably want to use this hole. So So yeah, we'll route all those in, and then I'll flip the case around and I'll show you how to plug all these stuff in. Once all of your cables have been pushed to the other side, your USB 3.0 header will go here on the motherboard. There will be a little notch and also a hole on your USB 3.0 header that will not have a pin on the board, and that's how you distinguish where this goes. You're going to push it in gently to make sure you don't bend any of the pins. It will click into place, and we're going to push that cable back to cable manage the best of our ability. Next, we'll look at all of these small individual reset switch, power switch, all of these cables that allow you to function the computer outside of the case. As I said before, your motherboard will have each one of these labeled in a colored format on the header, so I'm just going to fast forward to already having these plugged in. Next, you'll locate all of your USB and audio headers. Your HD audio header is always going to be at the far left of your motherboard. There is a specific way that this will go in. There's going to be one pin missing from your motherboard, and that distinguishes the filled in hole, and that is the way, the orientation that this is added. Next is your USB. USB headers will be distinguished by the USB print at the back of the header. Again, there's going to be one filled hole. You'll find the pin missing, and that is the orientation that the USB will be added. Once all your cables have been added to the motherboard, you're going to pull them to make them tight, and it's going to look more It's going to look more neat and tidy. Tidy was the word I was looking for. Once we get all these cables managed in the back. Now we'll add the graphics card. The graphics card for this build, again, is the R7 370. All graphics cards will be mounted the same. You're going to have a PCI slot right underneath your CPU. It's going to be the longest slot, and it'll also have a lever retention arm to keep the card in place. That's how you distinguish it. You're going to want to lay down the case flat. Add the card. The card will be placed in like this. This here is the retention arm. Make sure that the card is aligned properly and push down. The card will rest in the place. Then you can take your screws and apply them at the back. Next will be the addition of your hard drive. And then we'll move on. Your hard drive is going to have the SATA connectors on one side. This will be the side that you want facing the back of your case. There's a few possibilities of how you'll add the hard drive. One will be the drive sled with this case, which is the kind that expands. You place the hard drive in and you put them together and it holds it in place. Then there's also the kind that just snap on to the sides of the hard drive and act as rails. But this is how this one's added. You're going to put it in one side. There's going to be some pins that go into the holes, and then you're just going to push it tightly. And that is how the hard drive is added. There's going to be a hard drive bay at the base of the PSU shroud. And it just slides in. And there's a snap. Hard drive is in place. Now we'll move on to the power supply. This is the Thermaltake Smart 650 watt. It'll go into the case like so. You'll use 4 screws to mount in the power supply, and make sure the switch is on, because you know you might do all this work and the switch being off like that, computer won't turn on. So make sure it's up. Now your power supply is in place, and we'll move on to adding all the other cables needed for the build. Your motherboard will come with at least one of these. It's a SATA 3 6 gigabit transfer cable. This will go into a SATA header on your motherboard and will be added to your hard drive to allow data to transfer from the motherboard and the hard drive, and so that your hard drive will be utilized during your computer. You'll take the 90-degree angle and apply it to the smaller of the SATA headers on your hard drive, and you'll feed it through like you did the reset switch and all of the other smaller headers through the top to allow for easy access to your motherboard. Then we'll start working with all of the power supply cables. The cables needed for this build will be the CPU 8-pin, SATA. SATA is used for hard drives and optical drives and pretty much anything that acts as a storage device. You'll need your 24-pin motherboard. These red cables identify PCI power transfer. This will be for your graphics card. And then these Molex connectors will be used to power our fan controller. The first header that we'll manage will be the 8-pin CPU header. There will be a hole at the top of the case. We'll route that through and grab it through the other side to make sure that it stays in place. Then we'll add our 24-pin motherboard header. Motherboard header will go through the same hole as the USB 3.0. The SATA can stay in the basement. It will be connected to the hard drive. To the left of the SATA motherboard cable, and we'll cable manage that in a little while. The PCI power connector can be put through the bottom slot of your grommet holes, and the Molex can stay in the back because this again will power our fan header. Like so. We'll move the case around and we'll plug everything in, and then we'll come back to the back, tidy up the cables, and your computer is built. First, we'll take the 24-pin motherboard header, and there's a latch that grabs onto the tooth. Make sure that that is facing that way. Push down, you'll hear a snap, and the header is in place. Next, we'll do the PCI power connector. For this, we'll only need a 6-pin. For your build, you won't need this. The 1050 Ti uses only the power from the motherboard, and it doesn't need external power from a power supply, so this cable here will be not used in your build. So we'll connect it to the 6-pin header on the graphics card. Next, we'll take the SATA connector that is connected to our hard drive and connect it to a SATA connector on the motherboard. Most of the time you will want to use a lower number because those SATA ports get registered first. They will be located at the base of your motherboard and will be labeled as such, 0 through 7. 0 will be the bottom left. You'll want to put this in that connector. It has an L-shaped construction. That L shape will tell you exactly how the SATA connector is applied. Once it is connected, you'll want to pull the cable through the cable management hole to make sure that it looks tidy. Next, we'll take the 8-pin CPU header at the top. The same as the motherboard header, there is a tooth on the left side and a latch on the header. You'll want to apply that latch to the tooth, press down, you'll hear a snap. You now have power to your CPU. And that is all of the cables that need to be applied today. So again, we're just going to push all these cables through, get it tidy as possible as we can. Some things that aren't required for cable management but help you out a lot are Velcro straps, your best friend. I use these all the time. Thread ties and zip ties. I don't recommend zip ties because if you have to unplug something, you'll have to use scissors or a knife or some type of sharp object to cut the tie. Velcro straps and bread ties, you can untwist it or just undo the Velcro, go about it, and then go back into whatever situation that you were doing. So what we'll do is we'll get all the cables together. We'll utilize the space at the left of the motherboard tray. Take one of our Velcro straps, preferably black because it's more aesthetically pleasing with the color of the cables and the color of the case. Pull all the cables together. Take your back panel, apply it to the side of the case. You may have to use force. Push down, slide it, make sure that it is attached. Take your thumb screws, which hold on your side panel. They can look like this, or they will look more like a Phillips head type screw that have grips on the side. You'll align them with the holes and twist. Your side panel is now attached. We'll flip around to this side. You'll attach the window side panel, which allows you to see all your components, which is why you want to have nice cable management. So it looks clean and nice, and you can gawk at how nice your system is. Running isn't some difficult. There we go. We'll do the same thing as we did with the back side. We'll take the screws, find the holes which they go in, and twist until it is tightened. You have now built your first PC. Congratulate yourself. You did a great job. And it looks pretty good, if I might say myself. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope the tutorial was easy to follow. And I hope that you guys tune in for the next one. Bye.